This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. Making a difference is something we would all like to achieve in our lives, and some of us get a real chance to do just that. On this episode, I chat with Corkonian Dr. Saranna Fanning, who is busy working with her team in Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital doing just this. Saranna talks about her life and her career, the accidental journey to science, and the work she and her colleagues are doing to try and find a cure for Parkinson's disease, which affects millions and incredibly is rising significantly across the world. She believes a cure is possible, and with the support of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, she believes that she and her team will help find that cure. Let's hear from Saranna. A big welcome to Just Saranna, the conversation we were having. So it's Dr. Saranna Fanning, and I know you don't like really using the doctor word, but it is true, and you are a doctor and you're doing some incredible work. I want to start in a way with a headline that I read, which in a way would kind of blow your mind about the kind of work that people will end up doing. So 2 million awarded by the Michael J. Fox Foundation to Brigham investigators, David Wall and Saranna Fanning. You're doing some phenomenal work, aren't you?
I like to think that we're in a good position to try and make a difference. And, when you say the doctor title, I do have a doctor title. I do have a PhD. And it's because I've been very fortunate to be in a position to have gone down that route in life. And I have a job that doesn't feel like a job. Maybe nobody should tell my supervisors or bosses, but I would do this job if I was not paid to do it. And, the heading that you mentioned relates to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and they have been very supportive of our way of thinking about tackling the problem coming from a different angle. And I'm very fortunate to be, at Harvard Medical School and at Brigham and Women's Hospital in a place where we can find candidate therapeutic targets and then try and translate those all the way through, hopefully, to clinical trials. And a paper we published back in the end of 2018, that target has now reached clinical trials. So, a lot of people around here talk about shots on goal for different neurodegenerative diseases, and we're really hoping that this is one. So I'm very fortunate to be supported by the campus I'm on here and then also by the Michael J. Fox Foundation.
Yeah, and it's Parkinson's disease that we're talking about.
That's right. So my group is focused on Parkinson's disease. Over the years, for many decades now, people have thought about that disease as being a problem of abnormal proteins. So proteins accumulating in a way that they shouldn't. And I agree that happens. I think there's another component. So the brain is very lipid rich, and we know that lipids change with aging, and we know that fatty acids can be differently balanced in the brain of some Parkinson's disease patients. These are the same fatty acids that we think about in our diet, unsaturated or saturated fatty acids. And so my group is really interested in, as well as addressing the protein problem, looking at it from the perspective of there being also a lipid-based problem.
Okay. So I want to talk about that incredible work. But in a way, I'd like the listener to get to know who Saranna is and how you ended up doing this incredible work. I know you're the assistant professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School and Brigham Women's Hospital, is that correct?
Yeah, Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Okay. So, a big rewind. Who the hell are you and where did you come from?
Big question. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm Saranna Fanning. I'm originally from Cork and I spent a lot of my life growing up in Ballincollig. I did primary and secondary school in Ballincollig. And I think probably right before I became a teenager, we moved to Kerry Pike. So very much Cork based. With the exception of summers, I used to spend a lot of time in Tralee. Both of my parents were born in Tralee. So I spent a lot of summers with my grandmothers, which was wonderful. And I think the combination of the type of people my parents were, coupled with the schools that I was very fortunate to go to, gave me the opportunity to embrace, you know, opportunities in music, which we discovered was fun for me, but I was probably not talented enough in the areas of sports, which we discovered very quickly. I was never going to be at race day in Porky Queeve. We also discovered, I'd like to say after 2 camogie games, but it's probably realistically one, that I just wasn't going to make it on the field either. But I had the opportunity to also explore the area of science. And that's one that took off for me. And I think there were people during my primary school at a time where science wasn't really taught in primary school, like Orla Murphy, who really encouraged me to think about science more from a nature perspective, because the school, Scolbara, had a nature trek. So I think that was the first thing that kind of planted an idea in my head. And then when I went to secondary school in Coláiste Column in Ballincollig, it turns out I was not good at science. And the junior cert told me that. And so during transition year, the school gives people great opportunities to partake in multiple things, but I had the opportunity to be part of the Young Scientists exhibition. At the time, I think the first time I entered it, it was the Aer Lingus Young Scientists exhibition, and then it became the BT Young Scientists exhibition. And again, some wonderful teachers like Karen Daly and Fiona O'Sullivan who really nurtured the fact that I was interested in this area. And I was given a wonderful opportunity to spend a lot of my transition year in the Department of Microbiology in UCC and worked with some great people, Kevin Collins, Darren Morrissey. A lot of people gave me the opportunity to be part of that department and really experience what, quote unquote, real science is. So, I don't know what the secondary school curriculum looks like right now, but I was frustrated at having to learn the list of names for different parts of plants or showing that water boils at 100 degrees. They were very valuable for showing a type of scientific method, but this really gave me the opportunity to see what an experiment looks like when you go into it without knowing what the outcome will be. And so I think from that point, I was kind of on the road to science. And early on, I had the opportunity to work with some wonderful people in the Department of Plant Science in UCC. So I got a very different take relative to the microbiology experience I'd had. And then I also, again, with the Kerry connection, veered into industry for a summer. And I worked for a company called Kerry Algae that made seaweed-based products. And that was a great science experience, but also a life experience because the company was based in Ardfert, basically in a quarry. And so it was just a very different life experience to what I'd had up to that point. And I did my undergraduate degree in UCC in microbiology and really enjoyed my time in UCC. It gave me a lot of opportunities and again, too many people to name, but a lot of people contributed to my love of science and essentially to who I am when you ask the question, who are you? And when I finished my undergraduate degree in UCC, I had the opportunity to take part in the FOSS Science Challenge internship program. It's a program that ended up being a little bit controversial later on, but really for me, it was transformational. And I don't use that word lightly. There were people like Pat O'Callaghan in Cork, John Cahill in Dublin, and actually 2 Irish people out in Florida. My research and friends of mine who were there at the same time involved being at NASA at the Kennedy Space Center. And again, a great science experience, a great life experience, and having 2 Irish people, one actually Maureen Gannon from Cork, really it really made something of the whole experience. And she and Tony were very aware that this was the start of a lot of scientific careers for people. So I think a lot of that has culminated in where I went after that and maybe to who I am today. At that point, I transitioned to a research assistant position at Columbia University in New York. And I think that was a defining time in my life. It's, no matter how many times people tell you it's a big city and it's a big experience, it's only when you're there that you realize the experience and the opportunity that you have. And I had a great experience in Aaron Mitchell's lab. And there were times where I would go in the morning and I would see the sun go down at night and I would see the sun come back up the following day, and I would go home and shower and change clothes before people came in, because it was just such an exciting environment and so many opportunities to learn from people who knew so much and were really invested in their research. And I think Aaron's investment in science and investment in teaching people and wanting to see people grow, again, was a huge defining factor for me. So at the end of that year, there was a joint PhD program set up such that I spent part of every year at UCC and Douwe van Sinderen's lab working on probiotics, the same probiotics that we all think about in yogurt, etc. And the other part of the year working with Aaron Mitchell, initially at Columbia University in New York, and then at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And that research was based on something called Candida albicans, which causes multiple different types of infections, but it forms biofilms on medical devices, transplant devices, for example. And so again, a really exciting area to be part of that research community. And I think the thing that really brought me up to my position today was I transitioned to a postdoc position in the lab of Susan Lindquist at the Whitehead Institute at MIT. And really, she was a pioneer and innovative and a thinker that you don't really come across very often. And she gave me an opportunity to open up an area of research I was interested in, that I could be independent in terms of my approach, but I was very much supported. And being in that environment again was really phenomenal. And it gave me the opportunity to start in the area I work in now, which is on neurodegenerative diseases. And Susan had this really interesting approach for using more basic models. So she started using the yeast model, so the same yeast that goes into our beer and bread, and she would introduce the proteins that we associate as being hallmarks of disease for things like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. And it would help work out what kind of candidate therapeutic targets we maybe should look at, because genetically, there's a high degree of conservation, believe it or not, between a yeast cell and a lot of our human cells for basic pathways. And in fact, it was this yeast model that ultimately led us to the 2018 paper, where there's now a candidate therapeutic target being trialed. And so really, I've been very fortunate to have all of those opportunities along the way. And one of the key things that happened during my time in Sue's lab was I started to collaborate with Dr. Dennis Selko here at Harvard Medical School and Brigham. And we had a joint interest in the disease protein that we associate with Parkinson's disease. And he was also interested in lipid biology. And unfortunately, at one point, Sue passed away somewhat unexpectedly. And really, I've used the word defining probably too many times already in the podcast, but this was a defining time because this was a sink or swim time for me. And Dennis made it possible for me to swim. And he gave me every possible floating aid to really support that. And he's continued to do so. And because he's also a medical doctor and I get to be in the hospital environment, it's been a really driving factor to be part of a neurology department where people see patients every day. And it really, every day, it's kind of invigorating to remind you that the ultimate goal is to help patients. So that's, sorry, a very long-winded answer to who are you?
Well, you gave me the answer, Saranna, so I did ask the question. That is some whistle-stop tour of a really interesting life to date. How is it that this kid who was bouncing around secondary school, who pretty much thought they weren't very, very good at science, I think without a turn or two, you would have been lost to science. You'd be working as, I've no idea. What were the other options? That wasn't sparking you. Have you any idea what you would have ended up doing? What path you were likely to take?
When I was in secondary school, I considered law at one point. That was something that was on my mind. And I always thought maybe something in journalism could be interesting. So very, very different fields. But I think without knowing it, I was going down a science route probably pretty early.
But you were nearly lost to science, weren't you? Pretty much.
I think, in all honesty, my junior cert results created some concern for me because I think when you're that interested, and Coláiste Column was a fantastic school for teachers supporting science, I think I was so invested, but then to see a mark, I actually don't remember what I got, being honest, but when you see a mark that maybe says you're not doing that well at this, it makes you think, well, maybe I should consider something else. So I very well could have ended up doing something else for sure.
Yeah. And what went wrong there? How does someone who is so clearly suited at a colossal level to science, how does that person with their academic system and everything else at a very junior level, how do they go wayward? Can you even understand that?
You'll probably be aware of this, but I grew up in a house where asking questions was a real positive. And so, and always kind of debating something and thinking about something from a different perspective. And both my parents really brought that to the table. And I think perhaps I was doing too much of that, in the sense that I won't say too much of that. I think it's a real positive, but I think I just wasn't invested in what I now know to be the foundational basics of, learning the different names of the plants or learning the basics about bacteria. I found that difficult to just learn things off, if you like.
And it's funny, before we jumped on this recording, we had to send in a tender. I keep on saying to the team that a big part of those tenders is like your Leaving Cert exam. They give you points for particular things and you need to very, very carefully look through that criteria. And if they need a health and safety statement, you give them a health and safety statement, even though we work in a marketing and PR agency and there's little or no requirement. And then you get the maximum amount of pages in your submission, 20 pages. And if the health and safety statement is 1 or 2 pages of that, well, that's 1 or 2 pages less where you could have been thinking about the client, trying to develop a good strategy and solve a problem or get a bit creative instead of just ticking boxes. And maybe that's part of it. And it's interesting that you spoke about your dad. Your dad, of course, is Professor Saranna Fanning from the Kane Centre in UCC, a new book with Assumpta O'Kane, The Leadership Mind.
Yes.
And a question I ask my guests a lot of the time is, what were the conversations at the kitchen table? And I presume in your house, it was fairly vibrant.
Yes, that's for sure. I think I had a unique situation and I was very fortunate. So I'm an only child. And so looking back now, maybe somewhat embarrassed, but I think everything in terms of the kitchen table conversation, revolved around me at some point, in the sense that my parents were always very interested in how was your day and what were the details of what went on and how are your friends doing and how was piano after school, all of these things. And I think it was a great opportunity to delve a little bit deeper, because there was a routine pretty much all the way through primary and secondary school where my mom would drop me to school and my dad would collect me from school. And so they both got different parts of my day. And so the dinner table discussion was, what happened to everybody during the day. And, if there was something that maybe I was unhappy about or I was stressed about, my parents offered very different perspectives on that. And I was very fortunate to have that, the ability to debate things or look at things from a different angle. And I think they helped me see early on that there are so many different viewpoints. And that's been helpful with everybody I've met and worked with ever since. And everywhere that I've traveled to, I think those discussions really showed me that debate and interest in other people really matters.
Yeah, because I think your dad's tagline, it's not what you think, it's how you think that's important. So could I nearly summarize it by saying the poor result in the junior cert was probably as a result of you just not learning things by rote because you've been trained to by your dad, I'm not sure about your mum, that's pointless, question things, look at things in a different way. And maybe your success from a scientific point of view is because different thinking is required. And that was drilled into you at a very, very early stage. Maybe I'm overstating it a little bit, I'm not sure.
I think that's reasonable in the sense that I probably wouldn't say drilled, in the sense that I always loved that my parents were very open to embracing whatever I was interested in. I think they were a little concerned about camogie because I think they knew I would do damage to myself. Yeah. But I think it was also a luxury that I had growing up, that if I wanted to pursue something like science, my parents said, well, how could this be different? What else could you do to see if this is for you? Rather than saying, you're not talented in this area, you got an A in English, go that route. I think that was a real luxury and a huge benefit to me.
As that only child, was that move away from Ireland a big deal for you?
Yeah, it was huge, but it was also a stepwise process. So over the years, when I was a teenager, I would go to New York, usually in September or October, with my parents. And so New York and the US had a big impact on me from a very early age. And when I moved to the position at NASA in Florida, it was a 6-month position. And I was going there with friends from college. And so I knew that was 6 months. And then I was home for a short period of time. And then I had the year in New York. But I was home relatively regularly. And so it didn't feel like it wasn't like I had a plan of 5 years in the US the day I got on a plane. And then when I moved back to Ireland more full time, and I was spending part of my time in the US and part in Ireland, again, it felt like I hadn't made any move. So the start of my move to the US probably was 2004. I'm giving away my age now, I guess. But so that would have been 2004. But really, Mike and I only moved here full time, I think it was definitely a February, I think 2011. So it's actually been a significant number of years now. But there was this kind of transition into life in America versus life in Ireland. And I think the fact that we were in Boston, where you're one flight away and people can visit and you go home, that makes a big difference. But the reality is we have a wonderful setup here. And from day one, my parents, because they'd spent a lot of time at the same point in their lives in the US, because they'd been so supportive since day one, it made a huge difference and it made that transition easier. But I'll always say that no matter what your quality of life is here, you don't have what I consider to be the luxury of just popping up home on a Thursday evening for a cup of tea or whatever it is. And those are the things that I think are the hardest that never change.
It's a big price to pay, isn't it, for living away? I've got a brother in the States now. He's been there since he was 21. And I hate to admit it, but there are times when it's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. There might be a bit of news in the family. And because you don't see him on a regular basis, I couldn't tell you the last time I've actually spoken to him. He was sending me a few WhatsApp messages today, which is great that all that kind of thing is there. But it is a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. You were saying cup of tea at the weekend or Sunday lunch. Oh, what are they doing? Ask them to pop around with the kids or whatever. You just miss out. Is it too big a price, do you think?
It's a huge price. And I often think, maybe this is putting words in my parents' mouth, but it's also a huge price for them in the sense that they gave me this opportunity to be here and they put me in this wonderful position where, to the point about the Win Happy podcast, I have a degree of happiness in every single day because I love what I do. And I'm in a great position personally and professionally. But, they did a lot for that. And then they don't get to see me all the time. And, very sadly, my mom passed away unexpectedly a few years ago. And I think everybody who's been in the US will tell you that those are the times when you really realize the distance. And so it is a big price to pay. And suddenly the things that you think are small become big. My dad's Sunday roast is phenomenal. And no matter what we do here, it's not Sunday roast at home in Cork. And those are the things, those are the kind of things that we consider to be the price you pay. On the other side of that, you try to balance it out and think about the fact that the friendships that I have here are really strong. We refer to some of these people as our Boston family because they're there to dig you out when things are challenging, and they're there with the bottle of champagne to celebrate everything. And so that helps because everybody understands what it's like. And a significant number of my friends over here are from Cork. And so everything from the humor to the accent it's helpful. But everybody understands the price, if you like, and everybody's price, if you call it that, is a little different. But it's very hard to be away from home. I am also fortunate in the sense that I don't know how my dad feels about this, but I don't think I'm ever out of sight or out of mind because we FaceTime most days of the week and we text. And, again, when it comes to happiness, these are the things. You're having a tough day and, something's not working in the lab and a text bot that pops up says, "What are you having for lunch?" And so, again, I've been fortunate that between being able to travel home, with the exception of COVID time, of course, between that travel and the ability to pick up the phone and text or FaceTime, for most people, I'm not necessarily out of sight, out of mind. And it's also you find that it's somewhat of a two-way street. I have friends going back 20, 30 years whom I hear from. They live in Cork and I hear from them every day. And so you mentioned WhatsApp, something will pop up to say my friend has left me a voice note and I'll listen to that over lunch. And that brings huge happiness. Yeah. So you try to find those things on the days where you feel like the price is particularly high.
We spend so much of our time at work and you like to think that there's a little bit of meaning in it or it's making a difference to someone somewhere. And I'm thinking back now to the event with your dad yesterday, the roundtable discussion about the book, The Leadership Mind. And there were leaders from different organizations and they were talking about the difference that they felt their organizations were making. And of course, the next part is trying to distill that difference to their teams. And for the most part, it's facilities, logistics. There's one which is entertainment and news. But when it comes to real meaning and making a real difference, what you're doing is just incredible. When did you realize the work that you're doing was actually making a huge difference and that you could make a huge difference to it?
Well, it's probably presumptuous of me to say that I can make a huge difference, but I think it's really come from my scientific mentors. People talk about here, what's your scientific lineage, or, and I've been very fortunate to have people who are at the top of their field, and they're there by choice. Nobody enters academia for the work-life balance or the pay or any of those things. So the ability to access resources, whether that's money or equipment or expertise, collaborators, colleagues, those are the things that make you think, I can make a contribution. Am I the person who suddenly comes up with the one target and the one drug that will work? That would be wonderful. But every part of the scientific community, chemistry, physics, biology, everybody makes a contribution. And so, this target that we published in 2018, when I say that's now in clinical trials, we do the basic biology part, the trying to identify the target and think about what genetic pathway is important for the disease. But other people take that on. Other people work out what is the drug that will be most effective? What is the drug that will cross the blood-brain barrier? What is the one that won't have off-target effects and cause any issues for a patient? And so all of those things are done by other people. And my group is very focused on cellular models, and we use neurons from patients that kindly donate them. So we're very much based in that area, but have wonderful colleagues and others in the field who use other models, so in vivo mouse models of disease. So everybody's really putting together the jigsaw, if you like. I think I've very much realized where I am now. I'm in a position to make a difference in the sense that people have given me an opportunity to have a wonderful group of people in the lab who also want to make a difference. And that's a really defining factor for the ability to make a contribution. And of course, funders like the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the nice part about that funding is that they're willing to look at new opportunities and new possibilities for curing patients. And they don't just give you money and walk away. They're really supportive of the science. And there are a lot of scientists working for the Michael J. Fox Foundation who constantly interact with me and my colleagues and my team. And so those are the kind of supports that make you think, well, if we're all in this together, we could make a difference.
And how difficult is it within that scientific community to bring all of the expertise together, working in sync to get the best results? In practical terms, does that happen? Or is there a lot of work happening right, center, everywhere that isn't joined up?
It's an interesting question. For the most part, I think a lot of things are pretty joined up. People are very tuned in to other people's different approaches and what you can learn and how you can collaborate on things. The big thing about my current position is that I'm very fortunate to work with people who have already developed a huge number of collaborations that work very well together. And being in Boston, there's so many academic groups all working towards the same goal. And then particularly in Cambridge across the river, so many different industries and industry positions there where they're interested in the translational side and to taking those next steps. And it's the kind of environment that makes the collaborative effort a lot easier. So I've had wonderful collaborations with people in Europe and around the US, but the ability to walk across the bridge and be in Cambridge and discuss with somebody what is the likelihood that this could be useful for a patient, and for industry to be just as invested in that academic industry collaboration is really the kind of joined up thinking that I think puts people in a position where I'm hopeful that there's light at the end of the tunnel, very much so, for a number of neurodegenerative diseases.
So what's the skill set, Saranna, outside of your science to really be successful and to develop things? Obviously, there's a bit of selling involved, and there's relationships like every other type of organization. What are the key things besides the science itself that are actually required?
We may have to do another podcast in 10 years and I'll let you know what's worked.
In arrears.
I think a lot of these things are hindsight. So there are practical things. being able to communicate your data, whether that's to a non-scientific audience or to a collaborator or a potential colleague, that's a part of it. Communicating with funding agencies and having the ability to explain why you think what you're doing will be different and will lead to the kind of outcome everyone is hoping for. And then also being able to communicate with patients. And again, the Michael J. Fox Foundation has been a wonderful platform whereby you're constantly reminded that it's not just the patient, it's the family, it's the friends, it's the loved one, it's a huge community. So I think communication of science is a really big part to play. I think you have to be persistent. The lab life is extremely rewarding, but it's a roller coaster ride. And unfortunately, more experiments don't work than do work. And it's the whole troubleshooting and being persistent and trying to see things in a different way. So that's for sure important. And then I think there's the angle of the ability to train people and find the right people who create a culture that's very positive and always asking questions. And I've been very fortunate, right before we started this call, I got a text message from somebody in my group with this image of a blot saying it worked. And, the ability to find those people and in the current environment to keep these people, to be really invested in that. I think those are the kinds of attributes that you need. I think there's a lot of other practical things from accounting perspective, and a lot of people would say that there's a marketing angle for these things, but not really the strategic type of person. I just get stuck into the science. But I think it's a question that I may be able to answer better when I look back maybe in 10 years from now.
Yeah, because that brilliant mind working away in a corner with an incredible breakthrough, without all the other things, it's just not going to happen, is it?
And I think the thing is, I'm not even sure about the brilliant mind. I think it's, as my dad says, the idea of the prepared mind. And it's not about just one mind, it's multiple different perspectives. And this idea of a multidisciplinary approach has been kind of thrown about for many, many years now. But that's really what matters. And when I joined the department here, there were people who were interested in the biophysics of lipids and proteins, and people who were seeing patients and thinking about the brain, while other people were thinking about specific neuron types in the brain. And those people all coming together is magic. And I was at a work event yesterday evening, and it's magic to get together with colleagues who do very different things, and you're telling them about your week and they say, oh, we should collaborate. I just found X. And so you're right, you can't be in a dark room. A lot of it is about the social aspect of science and bringing together those prepared minds.
Yeah. Saranna, Saranna from Ballincollig, you obviously have your scientific skill set. For you, what's the most important attribute that you have that has led to your success outside of the actual science itself?
I actually don't know what the answer to that question is. I think the fact that I love what I do is the big thing, and that's never wavered. There have been and there always are opportunities for other positions in different locations with different income and all of that. But I think the fact that I just love what I do, and the idea that you could walk in tomorrow and there'll be an aha moment, or there'll be a piece of data that says, here's something that might make a difference to a patient, and being able to see that on the faces of the people in the lab. I think that motivation to keep going, and that's something I was basically taught throughout probably throughout my life, but throughout my scientific career. I think just keeping that motivation going. And that's partly professional, but that's also partly personal. It's the people that you choose to have in your life, whether that's, a partner or your friends, as I mentioned, my very local friends or my friends in Cork. It's all of those people that all come together to say, you just keep going.
It sounds like that passion and that love for it puts the fuel in your tank for all of the other things that you need besides your scientific skill. How many people suffer from Parkinson's disease in the world?
Millions is the answer. But I think the important answer to this question is, unfortunately, the numbers are going up very significantly. And so the reason that I wouldn't necessarily put a number on it right now is because people will say to you, X number of million Americans have Parkinson's disease. But one of the things that my group is very focused on, or at least an aspect of our work, is based on people who have early onset Parkinson's disease. And these people get Parkinson's disease, at 20, 30, maybe even younger, when we often associate it with somebody decades older. And the reason I say this is because we know that this is a disease of aging. So there are so many people out there where there's the potential to develop this disease. And we consider 90% of the cases to be quote unquote sporadic. So we don't know yet of the genetic reason behind somebody's onset of Parkinson's disease. And there are thoughts about environmental factors, environmental exposures, etc. But there are always studies going on that suggest new genetic risk factors. But there are 5 to 10% of Parkinson's disease cases right now that have known genetic roots. And because a lot of these lead to earlier onset Parkinson's disease, it's a good insight or a window into a kind of an accelerated or an exacerbated form of the disease that allows us to get a window of insight. But so the answer is, as we start to come up with cures for various different heart problems or cancer, people are living longer, which is wonderful. But it means that a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease are becoming and are going to continue to become more prevalent, unfortunately.
It is amazing with all of the advancement that something like this is actually gaining in momentum, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of what's facilitating new discovery is partly development of new technology, partly the fact that people are looking at these diseases and realizing that new approaches are required using this massive foundation of really important data that's been generated over decades. But looking at it in a new way, developing new technologies, looking at new pathways, and accepting that maybe these diseases, these diseases are not simple. They're very complicated, and it may just be that depending on the point of progression of the disease, different things may be required. And so from a scientific perspective, it's a very exciting time to be part of this community, but you're always reminded that when you're out there in the world, there are people with Parkinson's disease. And I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't see patients regularly. But when I have the opportunity to meet with them, I'm always struck by something new I learn. What is now complicated? What is now different for this person? And so it's an exciting time to be able to hope to contribute to a cure.
How important is Michael J. Fox to Parkinson's?
In my opinion, huge. This is a person who had very early onset Parkinson's disease. I believe he was late 20s, maybe 29, 30 when he was diagnosed. And he's really dedicated his life to being very open about what his day-to-day life is like, personally and professionally. And he's built, an empire where their mission is to end people suffering from this disease. And he obviously made the decision early on to dedicate his life to highlighting how important it is that people are invested in changing people's experience when they're diagnosed with this disease. So in my opinion, he's really fundamental, not only in terms of the financial support, but the motivation that comes from him and the team at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And, he puts a face on a disease and he tells people how it is and why it's important that we do everything we can to change the situation.
From a marketing point of view, being very crude about it, it does put a big spotlight on a particular disease, as you were saying. I even saw an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where he was playing himself and he was quite happy to make fun of himself, and he was overplaying the Parkinson's to make a point. And yeah, it made for a very funny show, actually. Larry wasn't sure whether he was, acting up or whatever. That episode, he managed to extract extra funds from Larry anyway, because of what he did.
And I think an important element when you use the word marketing, I think a huge part of this is that none of what he's been doing is a marketing ploy.
Of course.
He's never been kind of using this for anything other than finding a cure. And I think hoping that future generations, particularly I assume for people with early onset Parkinson's disease, that their experience will be different. And I don't know because I haven't worked with foundations on other diseases, but I think this could be quite unique to him and this particular foundation, the degree to which he and those around him are just so invested.
Well, the chances of success, Saranna?
I hope they're really good. From what I see all around the world, people are taking very different approaches, and people are also at the point, and again, this is something that the Fox Foundation promotes, people are really sharing their data. This worked, this didn't work, how can we troubleshoot this? And I think a lot of the techniques and equipment and kinds of approaches that were necessary to really delve into how does the disease establish? How does it progress? What's the mechanism behind the disease? I think the scientific community is in a great position now. And I see the medical doctors here and the clinicians who see people. And I think the combination of the scientists who are working at benches, the clinicians seeing patients, I think that it suggests we're in as good a position as ever for there to be some success.
Fantastic. Now, you are on the Win Happy podcast after all.
Yes.
So what's happiness to you, Saranna?
Well, probably at this point, professionally, it's hoping to make a difference and seeing trainees who are really positive about what they do and really excited about their data. I think, I mentioned to you earlier that family and friends are very important. So it's, that FaceTime with my dad to connect during the day. It's the voicemails and the text messages from my friends group here in the US and in Cork. Mike and I love to go to Florida. So it's that getting off the plane and feeling the warm air and seeing the palm trees. It's getting home to Cork and spending time with my dad and catching up on what's been happening. I used to tune into the Neil Prendeville podcast to find out what was happening in Cork, and I don't really get the opportunity to do that much now. So touching down in Cork is always nice to catch up on what's been happening in Cork. And I've had the opportunity to reconnect, might be the wrong word, but be part of UCC a little bit more recently. I've started a position as an external advisory board member to the president in UCC. And there was really a lot of happiness attached to being back on the UCC campus and seeing all of the positives that are going on there, in the sciences and in other areas. And to hear from the president, John O'Halloran, the kinds of plans and strategies that they have in mind that I think will really make the scientific experience or the student experience a really positive one. So all of those. And then, there are small things. On a Friday evening, it's been a busy week. And, Mike and I sit down and have some food and a drink and discuss what's happened in our lives during the week. And it's just that nice Friday evening feel. And then I love workouts. A lot of my social life revolves around that now. So lots of different things bring happiness. And maybe to some people, those things are maybe small, but it's what builds my day.
And you said to me that camogie wasn't exactly your thing, but you're playing a different game now. What does winning look like? What would the equivalent of winning the county championship in camogie look like for Saranna?
I think the best way to answer this question is to tell you, somebody asked me maybe 5 or 6 years ago, what would you like to work on in 10 to 15 years from now? And my answer then is still the same now. The answer is something else. So I'm hoping that I am out of the quote unquote business of Parkinson's disease because there's a cure. And probably about a year ago, I was looking at the mission statement for the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And one of the lines in their mission statement is, "We aspire to go out of business." And for me, that would be happiness, because particularly when I joined Dennis Selko's lab, he's been seeing patients for decades in the area of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And for me, the idea that someday he and I will sit down and he will say, "Today, this person came to see me and I diagnosed them with Parkinson's disease, and I took out my prescription pad and I wrote them a prescription for something that will cure it." I mean, that's the ultimate. And yeah, I think that's the goal.
Yeah, my God, that's some goal, Saranna. And I've one last question for you, and it's a tricky one, and it's a huge one. What was your best day ever?
You're right, that's tricky. And I don't know how other people answer this. I know in my conversations with people over the years, people say things like weddings or big professional achievements or a new home or birth of their kids. I'm not a big Hallmark holiday person. I've been very fortunate to have a lot of happy days, whether it's, a great Christmas day sitting in front of the fire with my parents and the dogs and great food. And I've had a lot of, birthday celebrations, all of these kinds of things. But it's funny when you ask the question, for whatever reason, one thing comes to mind. And I mentioned earlier to you that time in New York was a defining feature for me very early on. And I think it's because my parents also enjoyed New York. And I say this as the best day. It's a little poignant now because I lost my mom. But on their trip to New York, the last time we had a meal was in this beautiful restaurant. We had lunch in Upper Manhattan on Broadway, and it was my parents, my mom Mary and my dad Connell, and my other half Mike. And I look back at that now, where 4 people were just enjoying food and laughing and joking and discussing life in Ireland and discussing life in New York. And certainly one of those situations where you didn't know how good you had it. But, people often ask the question, who would the 3 people that you could bring together over a meal be? And I was fortunate enough to have that situation and to have that lunch with them. So I think looking back, for sure, that was one of the best days.
That's a pretty good best day, isn't it?
It was pretty great. And, when I think about the type of food, and the weather was beautiful, and to be sitting out in this kind of cafe environment where everybody was really relaxed and just enjoying the day, I think that's what happiness is.
Yeah, I've got a really good friend, Saranna, and he's after getting himself into this groove of saying no to everything. Would we go away together for a weekend, or would we go for a meal here, or do anything? And no has become his answer to everything. And I'm really concerned about him. And of course, his poor wife gets dragged into the no as well. If it's a very basic routine and we do loads of that, yeah, he'll say yes. But I think part of that adventure in life is that you're prepared to say yes. When your dad was going to the States and you were there, will we all go together? Yes. Will we all go for a lovely meal today? Yes. And the price of saying no is just too big. And I think you're absolutely spot on. We have to grab those moments, and definitely, if you can, and if you're lucky enough, work on those jobs where you have the privilege of making a huge difference when the rest of us, in all honesty, don't get anywhere near that. But I think your mum, Mary, and your dad, they equipped you pretty well, didn't they?
They were always phenomenal. I'm biased, but they were always phenomenal. And I think they put me in a position to be able to say yes, to your point.
Yeah.
And to also surround myself with people who were willing to take risks and say yes with me. And there are times when it's really intimidating and scary, whether that's professionally and you're asked to stand in front of 1,000 people and give a talk, or whether you are packing your bags to get on a plane and not quite sure what will happen at the other end. But in that example, as I mentioned it, when we moved to the US back in 2011, we were surrounded by people who said yes. So my supervisor, Aaron, and his wife, Barbara, basically set up our life for us here in so many ways. And they're those positive people who said, yes, you can do this. It's almost like the Obama thing of, yes, we can. And Mike spent 15 years in the Irish Navy, and we saw an opportunity to be here. And I think for him, potentially an easier answer would have been no, but he chose to say yes and say, let's see how this goes and let's see what we can do. And so I've been very fortunate to have those people who have encouraged me to say yes and helped me through the process of saying yes along the way. And I agree with you. I think somebody's life can be very different if you have the opportunity to say yes instead of no.
Yeah. So for the weekend that's in it and all the weekends after, when we get those lovely questions, I always say it takes two things to make something happen. Someone to say, how about, and someone else to say, why not, or yes, let's do it.
Some of the best times professionally and personally come from that yes.
Exactly. Saranna, thank you so much. So
Thank you,
lovely
Greg.
to get to know you a little bit. I should have met you in Ballincollig because that's where I'm living as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and my kids went to the same schools that you were talking about and everything. But thank you so much. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.